Morning, and thank you for attending today's webinar on the initiatives and measures taken by the Egyptian government to support SMEs. And we are very honored today to have as a speaker Her Excellency Dr. Hala El Said, Minister of Planning and Monitoring and Administrative Reform. Dr. Hala has been an impressive model for always bringing value and impact wherever she led, whether as the Dean of the Faculty of Economics and Political Science or during her tenure as an Executive Director at the Egyptian Banking Institute. A small remark, most of the questions received from the audience beforehand will be covered in Dr. Hala's presentation, and depending on the time, few remaining questions will be answered by Her Excellency at the end. So Your Excellency, Dr. Hala, the floor is yours. You can start the presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And I'd like to start by thanking the German Arab Chamber of Industry and Commerce for hosting this interesting webinar. And I think in these very unprecedented times, we need to be always connecting together to discuss all the challenges that the whole world is facing at these times. Let me start by why is this crisis is different from all other crises that the world have witnessed before. We have witnessed before the Great Depression in the 1930s. We have witnessed also the financial crisis that was at 2008. But this crisis is really quite different from these previous two that we all remember the repercussions on the global economy, because for the first time, the crisis affects both the supply and the demand side at the same time. And accordingly, all the global value chains have been affected. A lot of sectors have stopped completely, like the tourism, the aviation sectors, and others are partially affected, like the manufacturing and logistics. Also, the geographical aspect of the crisis. The crisis started in China, and then it spread to all economies of the world. So this has led to major repercussions on the global economy. If we look into the statements by international institutions, like statements from the managing director of the IMF or the OECD, we see that, for example, the OECD mentioned that this crisis is severe for all of us, but poor people will be hardest hit. Also, the IMF managing director showed that this crisis has disrupted the social and economic order. However, one of the statements that represent really accurately the situation is the statement that has been stated by Standard & Poor, because they state in this word the challenges, yet the opportunities. And I'd like always to highlight the opportunities in all challenges. So they talk about that the COVID-19 pandemic may be the ultimate disruptor. However, it's the accelerator, technological and energy transformator. Let me walk you through some of the major repercussions that affects the macroeconomic indicators worldwide, and then we'll talk about the Egyptian economy and the SME sector. If we look at the main effects of the business cycle and the decline that happened in the business cycle, we will find definitely that there are major employment losses. We're talking about 25 to 35 million jobs that expected to be lost during the COVID-19. Of course, this employment losses are basically in some of the sectors, and in some of the vulnerable sectors in the labor market, especially in the informal economy, workers are significantly impacted by lockdowns and the sectors that are hardest hit. Why are there employment losses? Because there is a decrease in the gross domestic product, the GDP worldwide, we are expecting a major decline, negative growth in the gross domestic product in most of the countries. We're talking about, on average, about 5% decline in the global growth in most of the countries. Maybe Egypt is privileged with the only positive growth rate, expected growth rate in the coming period. Also, if we look into the implications on international trade to the decrease in the business cycle, we will find that there is a major decrease in international trade, expected decline in trade by about 30%, according to the UNCTAD data. Also, the World Trade Organization is expecting a decrease by about 32% due to disruption in normal activity and life around the world, especially airline transportation, that will heavily impact trade. Also, foreign direct investment as an outcome due to these very uncertain times, foreign direct investment shy from pouring more investment in the economy. So also an expectation of a decrease of 30 to 40% of foreign direct investment. Always in international crises, one of the major concerns is the issue of liquidity. Liquidity crisis is one of the major concerns during all international crises due to the pressure that most of the countries put due to the decrease that happens in global debt levels. And it's expecting that there is a surge in this global debt levels by about 322% of global GDP. Of course, this huge level of debt levels is due to resulted from loss of jobs, some layoffs in some of the countries, decrease in wages. All this present a lot of financing issues and liquidity issues in most of the sector and in most of the corporations. Would this crisis impact the level of poverty? For sure, because due to the disruption that happens in the business cycle, due to the shutdown that affects some of the sectors and business lines, definitely there is a drop in income levels, and the drop in income levels leads to pushing the segments of wages and of consumption levels downward, tranches downward. So there will be an impact on poverty, and there is an estimate of about 500 million people worldwide to be pushed into poverty. Also, a lot of countries depend on their foreign exchange from workers abroad and from remittances abroad. And of course, due to the pandemic, due to the shutdown in some of the sectors, in some of the countries, the business in some of the countries, there is an expectation of a fall down in wages, and also a layoff in some of the workers that are in some of the countries. So we are witnessing some return of some of the workers who were working abroad in some of the countries. Definitely the uncertainty that the whole world is witnessing and the shutdowns in these sectors lead to a major impact on the prices of most of the commodities. So aside from the oil prices that we have witnessed a major downward trend and then a little bit of an upward trend, there is a lot of volatility in the prices of major commodities and strategic commodities due to the uncertain world that we are all witnessing. So this is the global situation. How is this affecting the Egyptian case? As I mentioned, we're living in a very uncertain world. For the first time, we have seen a major impact on the demand and the supply side. It's affecting basically all macroeconomic indicators worldwide, and the uncertainty gives a lot of gloominess in the future aspect of the world economy in the coming period. Where does the Egyptian economy stand? The Egyptian economy has just passed a very successful economic reform program. This reform program made us, to an extent, resilient to the sudden shock that we have witnessed worldwide. We had 5.6% growth in the first half of the year. For the third quarter, which is January up to March, we have achieved 5% growth. This makes the first 3 months of the year almost about 5.3% growth rate. This is coming from, we were expecting in January to March, according to the first 2 months figure, we were expecting to reach about 5.9% growth rate. So we're coming down from almost a 5.9 to a 5% growth in the third quarter. So we lost about almost 1% growth rate in the third quarter. Inflation rate is almost stable up till now. We are almost 5% inflation. This is also a major decline from the 24% inflation the previous year. So we have positive indicators as far as the inflation rates. On the employment level, employment was decreasing up till the end of March. We had an unemployment rate of about 7.7%. During the month of April, we have witnessed an increase in employment rate to reach 9% due to the impact of the COVID-19 on the labor market. Other important thing is that the Egyptian economy is basically a diversified economy. So there are some sectors that have been hardly affected by the pandemic, like the tourism sector, like the aviation sector, like some of the manufacturers, part of the industries. However, some other sectors are basically more flexible and more resilient, like the digitalization, like the ICT, like the agriculture sector. These sectors are more flexible and have been more resilient to the pandemic. Of course, all international institutions expect that the Egyptian economy, in light of the COVID-19 virus, will be achieving a positive economic growth. We are expecting by the end of 1920, end of June, to achieve about almost a 4% growth rate. Some of the international institutions expect 2%, some expect 3%. The IMF announced yesterday about 3%. Some other institutions expect about 4 or 4.5. However, our estimate as the Ministry of Planning and Economic Development, that we will be very close to the 4% positive growth by the end of this fiscal year, end of June 2020. Why? Because, as I mentioned, we have reached in the first 9 months about 5.3 growth in these first 9 months. The fourth quarter is hardly affected. Of course, we expect around 1% growth rate, because some of the sectors will achieve negative growth rate, like the tourism sector, like the aviation sector. We are expecting a negative growth rate from these sectors. So on average, we are targeting around 4% by the end of this fiscal year. What was the Egyptian government strategy adopted? We have adopted a proactive strategy taking all necessary measures to mitigate the impact of the crisis on the most affected segments of the population. So we did not make a full economic lockdown. We started supporting the economic activity through having specific related measures to some sectors, supporting the vulnerable groups, and monitoring the development of the crisis through different estimates and measures. We started by allocating the full comprehensive stimulus package of 100 billion Egyptian pound. This is almost 2% of our GDP. We have allocated this amount of stimulus package to support the most negatively affected sectors. Of course, the health sector, the tourism sector are the major two sectors that have been heavily affected. Also supporting the economic demand and the household demand. So some raise in wages and raise in pensions have been approved. Also supporting the vulnerable groups through having this committee on providing a sort of compensation to all the informal and irregular workers that have been laid off due to the crisis. We had, of course, a policy tracker for all these measures. It's on our website. The government has issued more than 230 policies under 30 institutions, targeting all groups and sectors, tourism, aviation, SMEs, and agricultures. And of course, the two policies that have worked hand in hand to make sure that we have a major impact on the economy are the fiscal policy and the monetary policy to support a recovery of the crisis and recovery of the sector. And let me seize this opportunity to share with you some of these measures. On the monetary side, the CBE have taken very serious steps on decreasing interest rate by 300 basis points and also announced a 50 billion Egyptian pound to fund real estate development for low-income families. For the business sector, we have delayed, the cabinet have delayed all sovereign payments, whether taxes, municipality fees, to all business for 3 months to be extended to another 3 months. And in addition to that, the CBE have launched a new debt relief initiative for individuals who are at risk or who are suffering from a default. In the health sector, we have provided a stimulus package for about 11 billion Egyptian pound. Also for the tourism sector, we have also provided soft loans to the sector in order to provide working capital for this sector with a 6-month grace period. Also exemption of all cafeterias and bazaars located in the historical and touristic areas from paying the rent until the crisis ends. So a lot of measures have been taken. All these measures are being witnessed very frequently. These are basically dynamic policies, so we are witnessing the impact of the pandemic on different sectors, and accordingly we are suggesting the different solutions and different mitigation measures for different sectors in order to mitigate the impact of the crisis on different sectors and on vulnerable groups. What are our priorities now, and what are we working, because we know that the pandemic will be over month, 2, 3, 6 months. So we had to work on a post-pandemic scenario. So we are expecting to have a new world economic order after the COVID-19. And of course, we are not doing this on the government on their own. We are open to the public. We discuss this through public dialogues with different segments of the society. We always believe in the participatory approach. So we cooperate and coordinate with the private sector, with the civil society, with academia, with think tanks, parliamentarians, in order to discuss what are the shape of the new world economic order, what are the steps to be taken, what are the priorities of the sectors that we should be all working together in order to develop the new normal and the new world economic order. A lot of questions are being raised. What are the major economic powers to lead the global economy? What is the role of the international institutions and the multilateral institutions? Definitely, these challenges that the countries face, whether in the health sector or in the agriculture and food sector, will definitely make the countries more focused on to be more self-sufficient at least. So food security is one of the major priorities that a lot of countries will seek to be self-sufficient. Of course, the issue of social protection, of providing more jobs, of providing more labor protection and more unemployment protection facilities will be one of the main areas and of the main things that the countries will be working on. Definitely the SME sector is one of the major sectors that enhances and is one of the catalysts for moving and enhancing the economy, especially in these types of crisis. The SME sector provides a lot of jobs, helps in employability, helps in having more inclusive economic growth on more regional balances across different governorates. It helps on having more equal gender balanced growth. So the role of SME in Egypt is quite crucial. When we started compensating the irregular workers, we have gathered a database of about 4.4 million employees who are working in irregular workers that are very vulnerable. So we are providing a national strategy for, we're working on a national strategy for these irregular workers to help them become part of the inclusive economic growth in Egypt. Definitely the role of ICT and digitalization is crucial. We will be witnessing, of course, a more reliance on digitalization. And I think the crisis has showed us the importance of digitalization, especially in education. In meetings, we're all meeting now online. Investing, of course, in health sector is increasing. And this is what the government of Egypt have allocated in its new investment plan in 2021. We have allocated almost 70% increase in the public investment during this coming year. Main priorities are to the health sector, to the education sector. We talk about almost between 60 to 80% increase in health and education. Also 300% increase in digitalization, in investment in infrastructure, in digital infrastructure. We increased the investment by about 300%. Not to mention that we have, in the past 3 years, we have allocated about 50 billion Egyptian pounds in investment in infrastructure, in the digital and the ICT infrastructure. We have also in the health sector, we have focused on specific needs that was always a challenge in Egypt, especially healthcare hospitals, intensive care beds. All this, there is an increase about 77% in this area. Also, for the first time, we worked this year on a gender-responsive budget. Women are always in these crises and in financial crisis, women are mostly affected. Why? Because some of them are working as nurses, so they are in the forefront. A lot of women are working in the informal sector and as irregular workers, so they are very much affected in these crises. So we have in our this year's budget investment plan, we have launched the gender responsive budget, and women are an important segment in our society. 14% of the national budget is dedicated to women's needs. And of course, you have witnessed the emphasis of the role of women in the society, whether the political will and in economic empowerment of women. Also, as you have seen, we have used the Sovereign Wealth Fund, which is a new vehicle the Egyptian government has launched during the past few months. It's an investment arm that is enhancing the role of the private sector through more public-private sector initiatives. This fund main role is to monetize Egypt's wealth of resources, including its nature, its talent, its heritage, and enable Egypt as an innovative, agile investor. So our sovereign fund is one of the main vehicles to enhance the role of private sector in the Egyptian economy in order to inject capital and enhance more foreign direct investment and more private investment. Today, the Sovereign Fund is launching different sub-investment funds who are basically to reflect the government of Egypt's priorities, whether in the health sector or in the digital transformation sector or in the utilities and infrastructure sector. So we have about 3 sub-funds now that are reflecting Egypt's main priority. If we look into the importance of the SME, and as I have been mentioning, the SMEs are one of Egypt's main priorities. The SMEs worldwide represent 90% of the business. They employ about 50% of labor force. We see that the formal SMEs also contribute to 40% of the GDP in most of the emerging economies, and most of the formal jobs are generated by the small and medium enterprise. So according to the OECD estimates, SMEs account between 50 and 60% of the value added, and almost one person out of 3 is employed in a micro firm. In Egypt, according to the latest economic census that have been announced in March 2020, the number of establishment in this sector reached about 1.7 million establishment. These establishments represent 44% or 45% of the total establishment in the official private sector. A number of workers working in these establishments are about 5.8 million, or about 43% of total employment in the formal private sector. So it's basically half of our private sector. Our employees are working in the small and medium enterprises. However, as in most of the emerging economies, the small and medium enterprises face a lot of challenges, especially if we're talking about startups, and especially if we're talking about the COVID-19 pandemic and what are the major challenges that these small and medium enterprise face. Given that the small and medium enterprise have always a limited amount of working capital, and they always have limited access to financial resources, usually periods of shock, the small and medium enterprise do not have the ability to withstand these shocks as the larger corporations and the largest firms. And if we look on the major challenges that these enterprises face, if you look on the supply side, we find that we have three major challenges, basically liquidity problems that most of the countries face, total or partial stoppage of many micro and small and medium enterprises, and the issue of supply chain management. Sometimes it would take a long time to replace the global supply chain, especially if we're talking about decrease in international trade, and some of these rely on the global value chain. Excuse me. On the demand side, one of the major challenges are consumer preferences and spending priorities, which we will witness, or we started actually witnessing a change in consumer preferences. Now people basically spend on their major essentials and necessities. So change of consumer preferences affects the general consumption, slow of growth in general, and of course digitalization problem in most of these sector, because this sector, most of them are labor intensive, and digitalization affects the number of workers and the employability in this sector. What have the government of Egypt taken? Of course, SME sector before the pandemic had a special priority and attention from the Egyptian government. As I said, it plays a very important role in creating decent and productive jobs. Also, it has proven a very important mechanism for sustaining economic growth achieved during the past few years, and it also enhances our major strategy in achieving a more balanced regional growth across different governorates due to the flexibility of this enterprises to spread among different governorates and different villages. What have the government of Egypt taken measures during the past years? There was a financial support by launching the credit facilities initiatives. We have made an institutional change in the role of Ms. Meda as an entity under the supervision of the Prime Minister. There is now one board, so its institutional legislative body now is more flexible, more coordinated efforts. Now we have only one board instead of before a board and a board of trustees. There was before a board of directors and a board of trustees. Now it's only one board that comprise both the executives from the government in addition to the technocrats and the people who are entrepreneurs from the market. Also, there is a lot of non-financial services being provided, whether it's on entrepreneurship, logistic techniques, technology services. Also, a lot of incentives to encourage innovations, and taxation incentives are being provided in the new law that have passed from the parliament a few months ago, almost 2 months ago. There is exemption of taxation from startups. There is an encouragement for the informal sector to be formal through different procedures. Also, during the pandemic, the government of Egypt has was quite aware that this is a very fragile sector. And as I said, there are a lot of challenges that face this sector due to this pandemic. So there were specific measures taken by the government of Egypt during the pandemic as an additional measures to support the SME and export subsidy exchange for small companies whose total dues amounted to 5 million Egyptian pounds. There is an exempt regular microfinance client from any expedite commissions to pay off the outstanding debts. There is a postponement of the loan installments to direct lending. Also, the FRA, Financial Regulatory Authority, have issued a package of procedures to facilitate the micro projects, which including reducing or postponing the value of installments by equivalent 50% to the microfinance. However, the current crisis has also demonstrated the value of entrepreneurship and innovation to many SMEs. Therefore, there is a facilitation to access to information and technology. We are starting to create a platform for business owners, providing online training in digital marketing. We have, at the Ministry of Planning and Economic Development, we have initiated a project called Roued 2030, Entrepreneurs of 2030. This project basically provides a lot of support to capacity building. We do believe very much in our people. We do believe in our talent and in our young people. So we have achieved different initiatives, 9 business incubators in different universities, 19 projects in tourism incubator, which is called Mushroom Incubator. We have established also a business leaders observatory. It's called Roued Meter, to be updated as a national database that provides quarterly reports on the latest business of all incubators in Egypt. We have designed an e-evaluation system that replaces personal interviews to select students to apply for grants. We have also established a program with Cambridge University for masters on entrepreneurship in order to instill the mindset of entrepreneurship inside the academia, because this will ensure the sustainability of the mindset of entrepreneurship. We are sure that this investment in human capital is our major investment because this will ensure the sustainability of all efforts that we do to enhance the role of SME in Egypt. As I said, Egypt is privileged with 60% of the population under the age of 30. So they are our main asset and they are our main future. So we focus very much on enhancing the level of non-financial skills and financial skills for these young people through the different capacity building program, through linking them with different incubators and accelerators at university, at the youth centers in different governorates, and to make sure that this is being linked with the SME agency to make sure that we have in the future the right skills in order to be able, all our young people to be able to create projects and create business, not go out of universities to look for jobs, but go out of universities and graduate to create jobs for themselves and for their other colleagues. Thank you very much, and I hope I did not take much long in the presentation.
No, thank you, Your Excellency, for the comprehensive overview on the measures and efforts by the Egyptian government and by your ministry in supporting the business at large and also SMEs. If I can pick a couple of the positive, let's say, messages, the 4% forecast of the economy till end of June, that's definitely a very positive compared to the other countries in the region and also worldwide. And also the very clear prioritization, food and energy security, digital transformation obviously will be on the fast track, and also investment in health, pharma and transportation roads. And last but not least, I think the ROAD 2030 is a very interesting initiative, and I believe as a chamber we will be more interesting to get to know more about it and how also to make it available for our members. So I think in the left maybe 10-15 minutes we have a few questions which I think have been provided by the audience. So the first one, some SMEs today are have pending projects and contracts, and they lack the cash to complete these projects and sustain the overheads. So how can the government support these companies to solve this cash problem and also technically to overcome this problem?
Thank you very much. As I mentioned in my presentation, of course, the SME sector has a special priority and attention from the Egyptian government. As I said, it helps a lot in providing decent jobs. We're always caring not only about achieving growth, but about achieving inclusive growth. And inclusive growth means more jobs, it means more employability. So in order to make sure that there is a lot of employment opportunities, of course, this comes from the SME sector. And as I showed you the data from the recent economic census shows that 45% of our employment comes from the SMEs. So during this pandemic, the government has taken some serious measures to support this sector, postponing the loan installments to direct lending clients from owners of small projects in all sectors. Also, the financial regulatory authorities have issued a package of procedures to facilitate the micro projects. The SMEs working in the field of tourism, also the Supreme Council have exempted all the cafeterias, all bazaars that all are affiliated to the Antiquities Council from all payments and rents during the next coming months. So I think this is basically the financial support that we have given. Also, we have provided a lot of support from the Ministry of Planning and Economic Development in availing a number of complexes in the investment budget. We have allocated this year and the coming year about 8.5 billion Egyptian pound to establish 13 industrial complexes and clusters in various Egyptian governorates in order to help and serve the SME sector. So these complexes are available as the Milgham Plastic Industries, as the Damietta Furniture City. We are availing these complexes. They are ready, made. They are all provided with the proper infrastructure. And we have also equipped 4,500 industrial units. So all these complexes are now available for the small and medium enterprises. I also like to mention that our new law that has been ratified 2 months ago provides a wide package of tax and non-tax incentives. So we are talking about direct incentives for small and micro enterprises. We have taken into account linking incentives to the financial inclusion program, like putting the informal sector, providing some incentives to like the tax relief for 5 years for the informal sector in order to encourage them to join the formal sector. As you know, the informal sector are very happy working at their own safe haven So all informal sector needs more of a pull factors to come. So we were very keen to have a sort of incentives and tax incentives to the informal sector to be able to come and join the formal sector. And this is all there in the new SME law.
Sorry for that. Thank you, Your Excellency, for the answer. I think we will also get in contact with your ministry to get all this support and to better understand, make them available for our members as well. So the next question, how can we raise the awareness regarding sustainability in manufacturing and construction? And I think Your Excellency has touched the base, via showing the green economy and the importance of green economy as well in your plan and strategy.
Yes, thank you. I think nothing has proven more important on the issue of sustainability as what we have witnessed during the COVID-19. But let me say here that, of course, the government is very much concerned about sustainable cities, whether the new 14 cities that the government is establishing now. But let me assure here that this is not the role of the government on its own. That's the role of the government, the private sector, and the civil society. We are always very keen on engaging what we call the golden triangle. That's why we are very keen always to connect with business partners like yourselves in order to make sure that we work together on having this sustainable projects. As I mentioned, our 14 new cities are basically abiding by all sustainable measures. We are working with the Ministry of Environment. We are now trying to have one economic environment specialist in each sustainable unit in each ministry to make sure that all ministries, when they put their investment plan, they abide by all the environment measures in these in their projects.
That's an important information that the 14 new cities will be sustainable. Thank you for that. So the next one, are there any incentive packages given to the SME? I believe that was covered by Your Excellency, but maybe if yes, you can reiterate the most important ones.
Yes, let me say that if we look at projects and informal, there are some articles in the new law. I didn't know if you have seen the new law of SME or not. And it would be beneficial, I think, if we put the new law in English on the website, because now in articulating the executive regulation, I think it's very useful to have the feedback of the business community and the SME sector. And maybe this is one of the things I may suggest to the Ministry of Industry and Trade, that we can have a public dialogue on the executive regulations in order to get the feedback of the practitioners and the people working in the sector. But we have different articles for tax incentives for medium, small and micro enterprises. Article 27, for example, talks about projects and informal economy that apply for reconciliation of the conditions. They have to provide the documentation and for the establishment for the companies for 5 years from the date that they say they need to have a commercial register, they will have a tax exemption. Also, a custom tax of uniform category of 2% of the value shall be collected on equipment. So there is a flat tax in order to encourage all the informal sector to join. Also, Article 29 talks about capital gains resulting from disposition of assets, machinery or production equipment. Shall be exempt from any accrued tax if the proceeds of sale are used to purchase new assets. So it's encouraging the reinvestment in the company. So they will exempt any type of investment if it's reused again to raise capital or to enlarge the SME sector. This is going to be exempted from any capital gains. So a lot of tax exemptions are provided in order to enhance the role of SME and help them be more sustainable in these difficult times.
Okay, thank you, Your Excellency. I think you have shown a 300% increase in the digital infrastructure. And in this regard, basically, I have a question and there is a question from the audience. So the question of the audience, can the government involve more IT and programming private companies in their plans to facilitate the service to the government? And my question in relation, can you shed more light on the 300 million or the 300% increase in digital infrastructure investment? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. We usually, in the past 2 years, we have invested about 3 billion. 2 years ago, we have invested about 3 to 5 billion Egyptian pounds in digital transformation. Now we need to enhance the internet capacity across all governorates because everyone is now working online. Education now is online. We don't know the future is going to be full classroom education, or it's going to be online, or it's going to be a hybrid education, partially online and partial physical attendance. So the importance of digitalization is becoming more intense. That's why we have, this year, we have invested around 10 billion Egyptian pound to the ICT sector. It's basically to enhance the capacity of internet, to support different IT projects that the Ministry of ICT is developing. Also investing in human capital, in programming and in coding. I think this is a future, a great future, because also the map of the jobs and what are the future of jobs worldwide will be different. Some of the jobs, due to the increase in digitalization, will not be existing. So we need to enhance the investment in digitalization to our young people in order to avail more jobs. Also, a lot of importance now on the e-commerce and all issues related to the digitalization. So we are investing also in the infrastructure of the new data centers. This is also one of the major areas that we are investing in.
Okay, thank you for that. I think the COVID-19 crisis has put the whole economy in Egypt and worldwide on the digitalization, fast-track digitalization without being prepared. But I think we did great in Egypt, especially on the education side and also on many other services. So the last questions, what does the government expect in return from the SMEs and also from the civil society like German Chamber?
What we expect from the SME is more maybe working together on the clusters form, that we availed the complexes and we availed the clusters. However, we need to look into more of the value chain. The world is moving now its value chains from different countries to from China and from some East Asia to other countries in the world. I think that's a great opportunity for the SME in Egypt to start grabbing this opportunity and look into the missing components and localization of the industries. Still, our industries rely on intermediate products from abroad. With the decrease that is happening in the world trade, we need to look more into localization of our industries, to look more into the value chain and the missing value chains that we need to localize in Egypt in order to make sure that we have more industries, more self-sufficient industries and more competitive industries. And this will not be except with working together with our development partners and with our business partners. Correct.
Thank you very much. And I think to reassure Your Excellency's statement, the world after the crisis in China and then the whole supply chain, really the world now is looking to other countries where they can diversify their manufacturing and their sourcing, because they cannot rely on one or two countries like India and China and really they hit the wall when the COVID-19 put both countries on lockdown. So thank you very much for your time and the comprehensive overview and feedback on the measures from the government side. And definitely we'll get in contact with Your Excellency Ministry to really make available for our members all the information, the valuable information that Your Excellency have covered.
Let me say one last thing. I think Germany is very well known and very advanced in its technical vocational training. We are privileged with a lot of with our people. We have 101 million people now, or maybe 110 million people now. Investment in our technical and vocational training is a must, and we still have a fragmented technical and vocational system in Egypt that we need to put all together. So maybe the support of the German chamber in putting the mandate and the vision and the strategy of vocational and technical training in Egypt, I think will help a lot in our industry, in our agriculture, and in all our real economy that we really will rely on for the next few years.
Actually, that's one of the major programs we started to work on maybe 1 year and a half ago, and we will share with Your Excellency also what we are doing in this important sector, and then we can definitely share ideas how can we improve it first.
Sure, Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.